I just love to welcome Kayla to the program, and I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful hosts. You guys have a great show.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Ken. And yeah, it's gonna be an amazing show. So happy that Kayla agreed to join us on this, and of course, this is all about the biology. So we're really looking forward to seeing how we're going to tie all that together. But just a brief intro: Kayla Sanmartin came and presented at the Grow Up conference in Edmonton, and incredibly well received there. My wife was able to attend it and just thought the presentation was amazing. But she also talked about the story behind what got you into doing what you're doing, and I think it's incredibly inspirational. It's incredibly timely, and I think by the end of this conversation, we are going to wish that cloning is something that we could do, and that what you're doing can be cloned and done in so many other places, in not only in Canada but across the world. So with that, I'd like to just maybe, Kayla, can you tell the rest of us a little bit about what got you becoming the cannabis nurse?
Sure, sounds good. I love sharing my story because I agree. I think there's a lot of power behind any individuals that are sharing their story about how they came to cannabis. It tends to be such a powerful thing to hear. So admittedly, up until about 7 years ago, I believed every stigma that existed about cannabis. And I didn't believe it was medicine. I believed it was that gateway drug. I grew up in a really small farming community outside of Edmonton, Alberta. So like less than 500 people, went to, had graduated with the same kids I went to kindergarten with, like very kind of sheltered upbringing. And I believe what that Dare Bear taught me, cannabis is bad. I signed that contract, violated it quickly, but, I really truly believed, I did not believe in cannabis. And it wasn't until I needed it that cannabis met me in my rock bottom and really sparked my passion for where I am today. And so it was about 7 years ago. Well, I even go back further than that. I was in my third year of university as a nurse, and I was working in the hospital, started doing 12-hour shifts, and I stopped sleeping. I was experiencing stress, a new grad on the unit, or not a new grad, an undergrad even, working these 12-hour shifts, and I wasn't sleeping. I would be up all night long, staring at my apartment building. Am I allowed to swear on this channel? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, not a problem.
Oh, there comes Ken. Okay, I've been given permission. But I would look out my apartment window and go like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Everybody is sleeping in this downtown Edmonton and I'm not. What's wrong with me? I'm 21 years old. Why can't I sleep? And so I've been going through nursing school, very much Western medicine minded. Something's wrong. What do? You go to the doctor to ask what's wrong and how do I fix it? So that's what I did. And at the age of 21, I started on an anxiety medication and sleeping pills. And so I started to take those sleeping pills at the age of 21. They worked. I was able to sleep, just knock me out, which is what I wanted by that point after weeks of not sleeping. And so I started to consume those pills and I couldn't sleep without them. And I consecutively used those sleeping pills for 5 years, from the age of 21 to the age of 26. Never once in that 5-year span was I questioned by a doctor as to why somebody so young was using a sleeping pill that was meant for short-term use. And I knew that deep down inside of me and was really quite ashamed. I knew I wasn't supposed to be taking these consecutively, but I had no idea how else to manage. I had tried psychologists, counselors, all of those things. And so I consume the pills. And sometimes I look back now and I feel sort of relatively lucky to be where I am today still, because I would consume them while I was drinking. I was 21. I was a small farm town kid in downtown Edmonton. And so I always say it was the universe that sort of came and kicked me in the ass and was like, nope, no more. I had, I finished nursing school. I got into a full-time role, got married, bought a house, did all of those things on sleeping pills. I was still very capable, even though I woke up feeling like shit every single day. I felt hungover. I had the metallic taste in my mouth. It took me a few hours to wake up, all of that kind of stuff. And so I unexpectedly became pregnant. And was like, this is it. This is my answer. First trimester fatigue. This is going to solve my insomnia forever. Flushed my pills down the toilet and said, okay, this is happening. I'm going to sleep. Well, I didn't. It was 3 weeks of no sleep. And I was like seeing psychologists, doing all the work, trying to sleep, doing everything they told me to do. And at that 3-week mark, after finding out I was pregnant, I lost my first pregnancy. And from that moment, I knew I wanted to be a mother. I knew that I wanted that baby, and I knew something had to change because sleeping pills are not conducive to pregnancy, and I wasn't going to go back on them because they had such a hold over me for 5 years. And so my husband, who had been a rec user actually for a long time, and it was something that I always hated. So funny. And I remember after how many days of no sleep, it was getting closer to like almost 4 full weeks. He remembers me walking out of our bedroom, and I just looked at him and I said, "Roll me a fucking joint." He goes, "Oh!" He didn't react too much, but he goes, "Okay, I'm gonna go." And he just, quietly went out, rolled me a joint, and so I started to consume cannabis for the first time. Like, I had experimented a little bit at parties and stuff like that, but nothing really. And so I started to consume, and I started to sleep. I started to get relief from my anxiety and a little bit of relief from my grief, and I started to sleep. And I went, "Okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right." That's what I told my husband. And I said, "I'm getting my medical document. I'm not just smoking whatever you're getting. I'm doing this right. I'm doing it legally." I was like very, very adamant about that. So at that time, we only had natural health services clinic here, like in the Alberta area. And so their appointments are fully booked in Edmonton for months. So my husband ended up actually driving me about 4 hours south down to Calgary to get my medical document. And I can very distinctly remember that whole experience. I was so nervous. I'd never been more nervous for an appointment. I was like sweating. My palms were sweaty. He's like, "It's okay, Kayla. It's okay. It's not bad for you." Like, oh, but I've been told it's bad for me. But I remember looking around that office, and it was packed. Every race, every gender, every age. And I remember looking around wondering, why was everybody here? Did they just want to smoke dope, or were they actually trying to medicate something, or what was going on? I started to get curious. And so I got my medical document and I started sleeping. And I remember my husband pointing out to me after a few weeks, he said, "There you are, you're back." My husband's known me since I was little. And he said, "You're bright again." He didn't see that in me when I was using sleeping pills. He's seen that in me after I started to consume cannabis. And then I was hooked. I was like, I need to know more. And I started doing my own research and started looking into cannabis, learning about the history of cannabis. Man, was I pissed that the Dairy Bear lied to me. And that this wasn't a viable option for me at the age of 21. I had to suffer for those 6 years and lose a baby over it. And so I just started to dive deep into the research, started to learn about the endocannabinoid system, and I was just completely fascinated. And I remember telling colleagues in Emerge, where I was working at the time, "I'm sleeping." I couldn't stop talking about it because they knew my insomnia struggles. They had known I'd lost a baby. We were a really tight little unit of nurses there. And I'm like, "I'm sleeping." And they're like, "I want to sleep." And so I was directing everybody through the medical cannabis program in Canada, and about 7 years ago. But I've noticed they were always coming back to me. "Okay, well, I got my document. Now what? Now what do I do?" And so with the little knowledge that I had, my personal experience, I started sort of guiding people and sharing what I was doing and how it was working for me. And then all of a sudden, a few other nurses on the unit were also sleeping. And it was but that's just really what sparked my fire, was my own personal experience. And that's what ultimately led me to building the Cannabis Nurses. I did a lot of distance education, my first maternity leave with my first son. Multiple different programs in the States. And then in my second maternity leave with my second son, I actually started my independent practice, the Cannabis Nurses. Oh, I'm backwards. It's over here. And so I started to create my practice, and I was lucky enough to come across a place called the Canadian Institute of Integrative Nursing Development and Education. So it's a continuing education place for nurses that want to move more into that holistic realm of nursing, that idea of holistic medicine. And so I seen, they had this holistic nurse coach program. I was like, that looks super cool, but I'm on mat leave. It's not part of the budget right now. And so I ended up taking their independent practice program to learn how to create sort of your own practice as a nurse. And I was like, wait, I can do cannabis nursing how I want to do it. There's a few roles here and there for nurses in clinics, but I felt that, they didn't really get the time or the space to do what I felt was maybe necessary when it came to education in and around cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. So I created my own. And through that, the CIINDE was like, they're asking me what I was planning on doing, and I shared that with them, and they said, "You're our person." And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, "We've been looking for somebody to create a holistic cannabis nursing program for the kind, and we would like you to do that." So they put me through their holistic nurse coach program. And then in April, this spring of 2023, I launched the first accredited holistic cannabis nursing program in Canada. So, best to my knowledge, it's the only program in Canada where nurses get continuing education hours for the program. And I run a full-time practice providing holistic care to the endocannabinoid system specifically, and using cannabis as a tool in that. So ultimately, my 7 years ago, my biggest, lowest point in my life, my biggest point of grief has led to this really exciting, beautiful life and career that I'm currently existing in now. And so I'm forever grateful for the universe kicking me in my ass.
That's amazing. Now, is that an online program, or is it in person?
No, it's a distance program. So it's meant sort of like for adult learners that are doing shift work and schedules and stuff. So it's a fully distance program.
Right.
It has 16 different modules, and it's accredited for 60 continuing education hours for nurses.
But do you have to be an RN or RPN to take?
So for this one, you do have to have some kind of nursing designation. If it's nurse practitioner, licensed practical nurse, psychiatric nurse, whatever it might be. That being said, though, we've heard a lot of lots of people asking, do you have to be a nurse? And so starting this fall, the plan is to take the nursing lens off of the program and offer it to other health professionals, like allied health professionals and industry professionals.
Great. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exciting. Okay.
Wow, what a great story. I mean, so often in life you hear how tragedy creates opportunity, and it's just the ones
Absolutely.
that allow that opportunity to come in are the ones that become successful as a result of it, instead of, woe is me. So again, beautiful story, and
thank you.
I got chills. I'm sorry. It's just incredible. I mean, my partner passed a couple of years ago from cancer. And she had, when we originally met, I had blown out my back again, and I run with pills. Like, I took pills for 5 days. Like you, I was just fogged up, just couldn't handle it. Just, it was just making everything worse. And so I literally, dragging my leg, went to a holistic healing center. And went in and just said, look, I need help. I just meditated for 3 days, water only. I'm off the shit now. I want to start clean with, deep tissue massage, Reiki, acupuncture, herbs, etc. And so they welcomed me in. And the first thing they did was put me on Pauline's table, where she would, start working the areas and seeing what the hell was going on, and just how bad it was. And so I was in there 3 or 4 days a week for, probably better part of a month before I was ready to return. And so you get to know these people, right? Because you're laying on their table, and then you're doing restorative yoga, and then she's doing Reiki. And so, needless to say, she's like, so what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm a soil biologist. And she goes, oh, so what is that? I'm like, well, I work with plants and soil to, rebuild the health of the soil so that people can have healthy plants. And she says, well, do you know anybody, or you work with any cannabis growers? And I'm like, well, of course. They love their plants.
Yes.
So she was like, well, I have a lot of patients, cancer, otherwise, like you said, sleep apnea, or whatever it's called. And I need to have access to it. And I'm like, well, that's no problem. It's the black market's well and alive. I'll get you what you need. You want oils? You want tinctures? You want, edibles? What do you want? So we, I got her a full range of everything that she needed for her clients. And lo and behold, a few years later, she got nailed with cancer. And, there is some truth to what they say about, in protection, and, being in that kind of environment, it can cause things bad to happen. And she wasn't protecting herself the way she should.
Mm-hmm.
So the belief, or her, at least her belief, was that some of it was caused by working with others, especially when you're touching them. You take on their energy, right?
Yeah.
So when that happened, the first thing I did was reach out to some people I knew that are making some incredibly strong RSOs. We're really extracts. They're not even using the stuff that Rick did, and clean. 100% organic, regeneratively grown, and between that and the herbs that she was taking from a naturopath, she was able to not cure it, but hold it off. I mean, she had stage 4 ovarian, which is a death sentence. But she was able to come back from it with the herbs and the cannabis. So, I mean, there's just so much more to this magic plant than, people know, like you. I mean, how many people have this stigma?
And I think that's, where I'd love to have this conversation go is the fact that many of us are users, but we aren't really fully understanding what it's doing in our body. And my wife mentioned that you did a great job explaining of the endocannabinoid system, and it just maybe we could start there and use that as a bit of an understanding of what it is this amazing plant is actually doing to us.
Totally. And that's like a huge thing, like within my nursing program and how I run my practice is, as cannabis nurses, we should almost be endocannabinoid system nurses. We're caring for this endocannabinoid system, and it's the master regulator of the human body. Like by 7 weeks gestation, a fetus has an endocannabinoid system. So integral part of the human body. That little blob has an endocannabinoid system. Your cat that was in there and the dog that we could hear has an endocannabinoid system. Everything has an endocannabinoid system except insects. But yet it's like this mystery system. It's not something that we see in mainstream medical system or programs. It never spoke about it in nursing school ever. And then as we're talking about these other holistic modalities like Reiki and massage and yoga, those all nourish the same system that cannabis does. It's a very holistic system. And so this system, what I always believed and what I was always taught in nursing school is the brain is in control of everything, right? And the shitty thing is when you're suffering and you're trying to do, control your thinking through CBT and all of these different modalities, and you still can't sleep and nothing's working, all you think is there must be something wrong with me. Like what is going on here? And the thing is we're not acknowledging this endocannabinoid system. So it's like the body's thermostat. Oh, great, Ken. Thank you. And so this endocannabinoid system, I always kind of love to share like historically how it was discovered. So it was sort of the late 80s, early 90s, when the AIDS epidemic was really occurring, and we have AIDS patients advocating for legal access to cannabis. It's helping them with this debilitating disease. And it's helping them eat, it's helping them sleep, manage their pain, their mood, all of these things, and they want access. So you think we'd be studying, okay, so what's THC doing for them? Like maybe we should dive deeper into this and understanding why it's medicinal for them. But still is so much stigma at that time. And so instead they're like, why does THC make you high? That's what we care about. We don't care why it's medicinal. We just want to know why are people getting high. And so they put radioactive material into the THC molecule and watch the human body consume it and literally watch the entire system light up, watch the entire body light up with receptors for cannabis, for THC. And they're like, wait, what? Hold on a second here. What's this? So if we look back, late 80s, early 90s, as far as medicine goes, like it's still kind of considered almost a millennial in a way, that system, right? And so they're like, okay, there's receptors all over the body for THC. And they're like, okay, well, the human body doesn't exist with receptors for something external in the body. So it's not that our bodies were made to consume cannabis necessarily, right? So they went looking and they're like, so what's actually binding to these receptors in the body? And so they found the ligands are our naturally made endocannabinoids, or endogenous or internally made cannabis, and it's called anandamide and 2-AG. Anandamide, they actually argued over how they would name it. So Ananda from Sanskrit means extreme bliss or extreme joy. So this is our bliss molecule, our extreme joy in our body is what binds to this endocannabinoid system. And what's really unique is that THC is structurally almost the same to anandamide. So where anandamide can bind in the endocannabinoid system, so can THC. They're like, okay, this is quite a big discovery. And so as we speak about the endocannabinoid system being the master regulator of the human body, think of it like a thermostat. All it's trying to do is bring balance or homeostasis or comfortable room temperature to the body. So if we've got, something's overfiring, somewhere's too hot, the endocannabinoid system shows up on demand and tries to bring balance to that. If something's running too slow or too cool, the same thing, the endocannabinoid system shows up there and it's like, hey, pick it up, bring it to that comfortable temperature. And all it's trying to do is bring balance to our human bodies. Unfortunately, the modern day world that we live in really dysregulates this endocannabinoid system. Big surprise, right? And so things like chronic stress dysregulate our endocannabinoid systems. So this rush to do more, be more, balance more. And I especially think of that from a motherhood perspective because I have a 5 and a 2-year-old. So that's like very pertinent to my life. But this rush culture, right? 2 parents working outside of the home, just like so much chronic stress. And don't forget that we had this massive layer of like really heavy stress across society for the pandemic, right? And that's like, we see this massive shift in like worsening mental health post pandemic or wherever we are in it, right? So this chronic stress dysregulates the system. Other things that dysregulate the system is like a high level of caffeine or large amounts of caffeine intake, poor sleep, alcohol consumption, processed food consumption, smoking. This endocannabinoid system ages with us, and it's more likely to be dysregulated by women that are genetically women, and multiple pharmaceuticals. So really kind of this modern day world we live in, right? Like rush more, be more, you're exhausted, consume a bunch of caffeine, you don't have time to cook whole foods, so we're eating processed foods. Everybody's like at their wits' end by the end of the day, so they're using alcohol to unwind, having a poor sleep, and waking up and doing it all over again, right? That is dysfunction in this endocannabinoid system, because this system is responsible for regulating our mood, our appetite, how our body senses pain, how our coffee. I'll never take coffee away from anyone, by the way. I'm married to an Italian. He came by it naturally, deciding that 6 espressos really didn't make him feel good in a day. Anyways, so this endocannabinoid system, like I said, so mood, pain, or how our body senses pain, our appetite, our digestion, how we file traumatic memories, our sleep. And so if we think of those key components of health, if those were all in balance for everyone in society, imagine how good you would feel, is how I usually preface it to my clients. It's like, we can ignore diagnosis right now. Let's look at these 6 like pillars of health. Imagine how you would feel if these were in balance. And they're like, well, I feel phenomenal. I'm like, I know. This is what your endocannabinoid system is responsible for, is to regulate all of these things. So then it's taking it to that next level. And, how do we use cannabis as a tool to augment this endocannabinoid system and then allow people to enter into more healthy behaviors that support the endocannabinoid system? Because I know for myself, and I think about an experience I had postpartum with a really unwell child, required bowel surgeries and all this kind of stuff. They're like, oh, you're not losing weight. That's odd. Go see a specialist. And I sat down at that specialist and they're like telling me to start a diet. And I'm thinking, you never asked how I sleep. By the way, I don't sleep at all. And, so like, it doesn't make sense. How do people start engaging in healthy living behaviors if they don't have baseline levels of health, sleep, mood regulation, and pain control? You're not going to start exercising, dieting, doing whatever, all these healthy living behaviors, unless we have that baseline. And cannabis and augmenting our endocannabinoid systems is a beautiful way to get that baseline.
Amazing. I think that was such a great synopsis of really foundational in terms of where we want to go with our next questions. And I hate to jump right into something very specific, but you did mention that most vertebrates will develop an endocannabinoid system fairly early in the fetal stage. What are your thoughts around pregnant people consuming any form of cannabis during pregnancy?
You know what? That's a great question. And it's a question I get a lot. And ultimately right now where our research lies is there's actually just a kind of a huge question mark, because the current studies that we do have are really actually really poorly done studies. They don't really account for co-founding factors. So was that pregnant woman that was consuming cannabis also doing other drugs, alcohol? What was their socioeconomic status? What was their environments like? All of these other things that can create harm or risk to the fetus, we couldn't necessarily divide if it was cannabis or not. I did recently, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, sat in on a symposium that McMaster University did about kind of the newest research in and around pregnancy and lactation and cannabis use. And it was really interesting because they sort of showed us like our preclinical studies that we do have. So in mice, which we know give us some clues about what cannabis might be doing in pregnancy, but yet it's not necessarily translatable into humans yet. So for sure, they did see like growth restriction, which is like one of our biggest warnings. Don't consume cannabis because it's going to cause growth restriction in pregnancy and for your fetus. And so they did see that in mice. But what was really interesting is that the next part of the symposium was actually looking more so at the societal, like the perspectives of women. Why would they use cannabis in pregnancy? And what they found from, I believe it was a social worker with her PhD that had done this research, was that women that were choosing to consume cannabis in pregnancy typically were doing so for medicinal reason. If they were using recreationally, that almost always fell away in pregnancy. So, which I was like, this is great that we're bringing in this perspective, because sometimes mothers don't have they have to make hard choices, right? About, caring for themselves and their fetus. All of a sudden they're balancing two lives, right? And so ultimately, I think it needs to be a really educated conversation, because if somebody's using medicine prior to pregnancy, often it's not necessarily like indicative that they have to stop. If someone was using an SSRI medication for their anxiety, a doctor would be like, no, you absolutely need to stop. They'd be like, okay, here's our risk, here's our benefit, let's weigh it and let's decide what's best for your health and the health of your fetus, because ultimately, healthy mom equals a healthy baby. And so when I'm talking to people, it's very much about, why are you considering consuming? What's your why behind this? What's like other ways to augment the endocannabinoid system outside of cannabis? And if you do need cannabis, how do we keep the doses as low as possible, right? Because ultimately, healthy mom means healthy baby, right? That mother and her health is just as important as the fetus. So ultimately, we need a ton more research in and around that area. But I think that it is a mother's decision when they're given the right amount of information about it.
Great. Now, I'll turn it over to Leighton right after this follow-up. This is my supplemental.
Yep.
Okay, so very typically when we talk about cannabis, we are often thinking about THC or THCA or something that is intoxicating. What with CBD, that to my understanding doesn't actually bind to either CB1 or CB2 receptors.
Yeah.
And any other of these minor cannabinoids like CBG or CBC.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there? Do you think that there still might be some that the endocannabinoids may not perhaps develop at the same rate, assuming some exocannabinoids during pregnancy?
Oh, like if it would be safer to consume like CBDs or non-intoxicating cannabinoids in pregnancy?
Yes.
I think
what you did a great job of summarizing my long-winded question.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm trying to think back to that symposium, because they did find potential still that CBD could have impact on the fetus as well in that preclinical studies. And there was some places where CBD actually had like higher impact than THC, but I can't remember the specifics of it. I could look back at my notes and see, but ultimately we don't know for either. So it's hard to say, is one safer than the other? Like we just get so fearful of THC because of that euphoric property. But then it's interesting when we even talk about cannabinoids in children, that's always like been a big no-no. But kids tend to be like much more highly resistant to the intoxicating effects of THC than adults. So, I think it really kind of depends on somebody's endocannabinoid system which cannabinoids that we're choosing to use. So ultimately, we still don't know. And we have far less research on non-intoxicating cannabinoids in pregnancy than we do in THC.
Thanks.
And as always, you're pulling the questions out of my mouth. I love it. So let's take it a little bit further. First of all, this is a question that Av asked me, and I'm not sure, but being that you're in the medical field and teaching this, do you refer to CBD as a cannabinol versus a cannabinoid?
I refer to it as a cannabinoid. I don't even know really how I would. I've always just referred to it as a cannabinoid, I guess. Well, how CBD is different though in the endocannabinoid system, and this is something that I really make sure that I explain to every single patient that I interact with or client, is that CBD, they call it a promiscuous molecule, right? Because it doesn't bind to CB1 and CB2, or if it does, maybe some minor affinity to CB2. But what it's doing is it's promiscuous. It's like the sum of all these small interactions with a bunch of different receptors that's actually like creating the response in the endocannabinoid system, as well as over time, it's stopping the breakdown of our endogenous cannabinoid anandamide. So it's augmenting our endocannabinoid system by stopping the breakdown of anandamide and slowly boosting it over time. And so for me, it's always like people say, well, I tried CBD for like 2 days. Didn't work. Yeah, you can't do it that way. There's that buy-in factor behind using CBD, that it's that consistent use of it. And what I usually see is some slow insidious change by like 3 weeks. But by that 8 to 12 week mark is really where that therapeutic window starts to happen. And I remember one of my clients he said to me, he's like, it was like the clouds parted one day while I was walking. And then he's about 8 weeks into dosing. And he goes, what's different? What's wrong? Something's off. And then it dawned on him that his knees no longer hurt. That was the first time in 20 years that he was walking without knee pain. And he said he literally stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and was like, oh, she was right. Like, you need to stick with this. And I think that's like a misconception or a piece of education that's really missing, is that CBD takes time. It's not just like this. It's a bunch of slow insidious changes within the body and slowly within the endocannabinoid system that result in change.
That deserved the whole flow of gold bars, in my opinion. And I'm jumping in because I've had this question where, consuming CBD simultaneously with THC typically gives me a much better high. I enjoy that high, and it kind of makes sense the way you describe that, how CBD will reduce the breakdown of anandamide. So the bliss molecule is working longer. Now, I've often heard that you can, if you're greening out, you can consume CBD and it'll help you come down from your high. Can you explain the pharmacokinetics there?
Yeah. So ultimately, we actually still don't really have clinical research to support that. And that's like, there's multiple wives' tales about like when you're greening out, capsaicins, citric acid, CBD can help get you out of that place. So I guess the pharmacology behind that, or the pharmacokinetics behind that, is that CB1 is a negative allosteric modulator. So it's going to sit on the CB1 receptors in the brain, not actually activating it, but blocking that THC from binding to those receptors in the brain. So that's why, like, when I'm explaining a full spectrum CBD oil to somebody and they're like, I don't want THC, they're very against the component of THC. But then you explain to them that it's the CBD that's going to sit on all these receptors in your brain, not allowing THC to bind to these receptors, causing a euphoric response. But yet then THC can work elsewhere in the human body, creating its action and responses that, are really beneficial from THC without a euphoric high. And what's interesting, why you probably enjoy a high better when you add in CBD to it, is because it's actually boosting circulating levels of THC in your blood. So THC will last longer, but it's not maybe going to have like that intensity of that high, which then can really easily push us over into side effect, right? So something for my nighttime dosing, a lot of the clients that I work with are a unique group of Canadians that suffer with PTSD and nightmares. And so often I get to work with them and they're like, well, I'm taking like 40 milligrams of THC a night. I'm like, okay, how about this? And I call it the trifecta. So we do a big dose of CBD, a moderate dose of CBN, and then a lower dose of THC, like this 3-2-1 kind of ratio. And they go, oh my God, that's exactly how I want it to feel. It feels like they slip more into a natural sleep versus, okay, 40 milligrams of THC hit me, I better be asleep so I don't actually have to experience this. And yes, it's going to block my nightmares and it's gonna do that. Oh, nightmare guy here. Okay, hillbilly herb, you need to get on the trifecta, I call it. And they just find that it's way more effective. They can use much, much lower doses of THC to be still effective for their sleep. But I think like I'm in such the opinion that the more the cannabinoids, the better, the more the terpenes, the better, the more of that full spectrum, full plant medicine, the better for our human bodies.
You know, and I'm assuming you have heard of Dr. Ethan Russo.
Yes.
Right?
No, never heard of him. Never read like all of his papers ever.
So he was the one that coined that term of cannabinol, and I guess it was to try to separate these two because they have such different interactions and reactions. Yeah. But again, you know, Av asked me this question at Grow Up, and I was like, I don't know, but that's what I've always been referred to. I ended up getting the opportunity to hang out with him on Vashon Island because Pauline was a medicine maker, and I'm good friends with Shango Los out there, and so Shango made us the connect. And one of the real interesting things that came out of that 3-hour coffee, whatever it ended up to be, was that he was thrilled and excited to hear that Pauline was using THCA. Yeah. And so that's my next question. How is that? Because I believe it doesn't completely decarboxylate in our stomachs. So how is that affecting the system as well?
So, and this is really interesting. I was down in Colorado last month for the American Cannabis Nursing Association's conference. I did a presentation there. And there's a huge focus on the acid forms of cannabinoids down in the States because they're extracting from hemp and they're keeping it in the acid form, and because they're actually legally able to sell with it being a Schedule I drug. So there's this big focus on acid forms, which we don't really see here in Canada. But the beautiful thing about the acid form, and so yes, it's not decarboxylated, so it doesn't, it can't sit on those receptors in the brain, causing that euphoric response. But then we're still getting other properties. So when it sits in that acid form, our absorption rates are much, much higher of those cannabinoids than they are when we say, if we have CBDA, the acid form, versus CBD, we could see maybe 3 to 5 milligram doses of CBDA, where you've got to see like 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, like 100 milligrams of CBD, that we can get these much lower doses because they're water soluble. And so when we remove that hydroxyl group off of the cannabinoid, then we have a lipophilic or a fat loving molecule, and our human bodies are made out of water, right? So we're getting it's very difficult to get that absorption, you know, fatty food in the stomach, make sure you're having it with food, all of these things that we need to do to reach efficacy with decarboxylated cannabinoid. Whereas in these acid forms, you could do it on an empty stomach, it's water soluble, it's quickly absorbed. And I was like, I don't believe this. Like, some people had products there, and I got in late because of my stupid flights, and I'm like, I have to speak. I don't have any CBD. Like, I need him like help. And I'm like, oh right, I'm in the right room. There's like 200 cannabis nurses here. Somebody's gonna have some product. And so they gave me CBDA, and I was like, 3 milligrams of CBD. Like, really? No, this isn't gonna work. And then we started talking about the absorption rates, and sure enough, it does work. And so I think that we do have some promise when we're looking at like acid forms of cannabinoids, especially for individuals like with THCA, like, you know, well, they're talking about like, or that's THCV, I think, like the diet one, right, is the V. But I'm excited to see more of those cannabinoids here in Canada, especially some people just don't absorb lipophilic molecules. Like, with CBDs, like, they just don't find absorption. It's not working for them. I'd love to be able to find products and like, okay, well, let's try the acid form then. Let's see what that does. But I want to look up THCA here. I have my textbook. I always have my textbook. Anyways, ask me another question while I look up here.
That's makes so much sense. And one of the reasons, because Pauline didn't like to be stoned.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
intuitively just started saying, hey, let's use this more and just a little bit of the oil so that you're not going to get whacked all the time. And so
what was the response? What did she find with it?
It worked fantastic.
So was she getting like pain relief from it without being intoxicated?
Yeah, she's getting all the benefits of the cannabis plant without getting the high. And again, she had clients and she was trying to work, and so she couldn't be walking around stoned all the time. And
absolutely.
We used the what's his protocol? Not Rosenthal. Rick Simpson's protocol of trying to get her as close to a gram a day as possible when she first got out of surgery, and she was like couldn't even get past a quarter of a gram until
it's totally not a realistic protocol for most, right? To be able to tolerate that high dose, yeah, totally. And when I'm looking at my chart here in my textbook, THCA has almost all the same properties as THC, except it's an anti-proliferative. So it's stopping the migration of cancer cells, causing apoptosis of cancer cells, whereas THC isn't actually doing that. So for her, that would have been really appropriate, right? And then they consider THC to be an analgesic, where THCA is an anti-inflammatory. But that's a beautiful way for people to access cannabis medicine without, for some people, that euphoria can be a side effect, right? So I can't take THC all day long. I got 2 kids. What textbook and a business. This is called Cannabis, a Handbook for Nurses. So Dr. Carrie Clark, who I got to meet in person at the conference, which was awesome, wrote the first cannabis nursing textbook. And then she asked me to, when she writes the
Have you seen this
Cannabis Health Index? Yeah, I have seen it. I haven't read it though, but I've heard real good things about it.
Yeah, Pauline was in that book all the time.
Yeah. No, it's a great question.
So do you think that as a nurse, you can encourage the LPs to start making the acid form of it so that you'll have it?
I hope so. Yeah, they asked me to be part of advisory boards and stuff like that. So I would like to see, definitely some more acid forms of cannabinoids. I'd love, with all of these licensed producers on the medical side, to see every route of administration available at every licensed producer. I shouldn't have to have my clients moving around amongst licensed producers to get access to sublingual strips here and access to suppositories here. And if somebody wants to use the inhalation method, well, here's got the best flower. It's just so frustrating to have to move between all these producers just to find, what your clients need.
So Kayla, do you also, because I noticed on your website that you actually do some workshops about consumption and dosing and even the making of tinctures and whatnot. So if I wanted to consume some THCA, and I'm not the type who's necessarily going to sprinkle some flour on my salad, can I just take some flour and put it in a capsule and will it work?
Yeah, I've heard it will. I've never done it personally, but yes, because it's, as long as that flour, you haven't applied heat to it, which is then going to take THCA and break it down to THC. Then all of a sudden you have an intoxicating cannabinoid, right? It's THCA is incredibly unstable. I think that's why we don't see it. I know that Aurora carries one that's THC and THCA, a combo of it, but it's not just THCA alone. So as long as there hasn't been decarboxylation to move it into the intoxicating cannabinoid, then you can just consume it. Really, it can literally be that simple.
Okay. Yeah. So
what's crazy is the way they make it, they just crash it and it comes out in these little crystals. I mean, I'm assuming you've seen those, right? That's how we got it. We'd buy a baggie of these crystals.
Oh, cool. No, I haven't seen it in person. No.
All right. Well, when Av's talking next, I'll go get it, and so you can see what it looks like.
Cool.
Yeah.
We were able to get it at scale down here.
Well, and that's where we have so much more potential too, with juicing the leaves of the cannabis plant. This whole plant can be used, right? And here in Canada now, we have everybody growing, and all of their trimmings are mixed with kitty litter or sand and thrown in the dump to go to the you know, like thrown in the dump to like go somewhere. And it's like, we could be using this, but we're not allowed, right? But that still could be medicine, right? Like,
you know, they are actually allowed. Nobody's just chosen to do that, right? So you
really?
could take leaf material just to get canaflavin A and canaflavin B, and
Yeah.
same with the roots. You could harvest the roots and use those for whatever purposes. There's no restrictions on it. It's only on flower, but
okay.
They would be allowed to sell that if they chose to find a product and the market was there. But I think that's the biggest challenge, and I feel like what you offer by educating healthcare practitioners is starting to break that stigma and allowing for more people to turn towards using that whole plant. And
oh, totally. And that's a huge thing, is that I'm always talking about, is that whole plant medicine. This is a plant from Mother Nature. You know, we're putting it in our human bodies. We want the best quality possible, right? So,
you know, Kevin Jodry did an amazing session of providing juice. He had a juicer and he provided the leaf for the juicers. And he had tons of people coming all the way up to Humboldt just to get it. The only problem was that you have to drink it when you make it.
It's got to be fresh.
Yeah, it has to be fresh for efficacy. And I'll find out the name of the guy that you should probably.
You can't freeze it?
They tried freezing it too, but it still didn't have the desired effect. It degraded as time went by. But yes, they definitely tried freezing it as well.
And that's just the instability of the acid forms, I'm guessing, right? That's really playing a role in that.
It's something in it. It's called biogeochemical reactions, like you were talking about earlier. These minute interactions cause these chain reactions. So, you know, that's the problem with it. Like anything, if you're not using it fresh once you've created it, it's going to start to degrade. And
I know,
yes,
with all of our leaves from like our summer grows outdoors and stuff, we'll like throw it in pasta sauce or feed it to the chickens, or, you know, like it always goes somewhere. So
and the beauty of juicing is that you're really getting the easy water and the liquid out of the cells. So it's not like making a blender. It's a juicer. So it's just pressing the plant matter as hard as it can. And it's leaking out the insides of the cells, that's why it's so powerful.
Wow.
Or at least that's the way it was described to me.
Super cool.
On that point, I actually have to ask, would making an FPJ, because you're using the osmotic pressure to draw that out of the cells, would that be another way of creating that solution?
Again, you're now introducing something else like a sugar. So that may also have a negative effect, or it may change the molecular formation or the formation of the molecules. That's a great question, Ken, and I don't have the answer. But Kayla, this is write this down. Dr. William Courtney, that's COURTNEY. He did a bunch of work down here in California.
Oh, cool.
On juicing, specifically on juicing.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
There's so much to learn about this plant. It like never ends, which is something I love.
It's the problem is they demonized it because it was probably going to be way bigger competitor against pharmaceuticals because it does so much, right? There's just so much benefit to it. So anyway,
and that's unique.
I'm not going down that track today.
No, it's true though, but it's like the only thing that has like this unique ability to nourish this endocannabinoid system. They tried to create pharmaceuticals to do similar things, and they nearly killed people. They tried to create like a FAW, something that blocked FAW, which is what CBD does. So this enzyme in the liver that breaks down a lot of things, a lot of our drugs, anandamide. And yeah, they nearly killed people. It's just, you know, this is nature. And sometimes when I watch these symposiums and they're talking about CBD, and these scientists are really like scratching their heads over CBD, and they're like, there's just so much to this. Like, how do we even break this down? Like, we don't understand it. And I kind of sit back and I wonder, are we ever going to fully understand this? And is that okay? Like, I think so at some points it's okay, because the beautiful thing about plant medicine and about cannabinoid medicine is that it's required that the individual or the patient client becomes embodied again and really starts to understand how does their body respond to these cannabinoids so that they can create their own like personalized regime. Or that's what I help them do, is feel safe in their body again, and then notice, how do I respond to this dose? And knowing that my dose is going to be unique to me. And what we end up doing is through education, we create independence, which is huge. Education, independence, and empowerment. That's all somebody with chronic pain wants. You know, I had somebody come to me and said, like, I want control. I don't want to have to go to my doctor to get a pharmaceutical that's a narcotic to, like, you know, trick my mind that I'm in pain, or the next time I'm on the floor with a back pain flare, I don't want to have to call that ambulance, because here was my experience in Emerge. And so it's like, okay, let's dive in then. And this is going to take some time, but we're going to work together and allow you to learn how your body responds to cannabinoids. So the next time your life ebbs and flows, you also ebb and flow your cannabis doses, because you know how they work for you. And that's a beautiful, powerful medicine that's teaching people to respond to how their bodies feel. And pay attention. You have to pay attention to how cannabis makes you feel. You can't sit down and say, well, I have nightmares and I don't sleep. They'll say, okay, this is exactly what you take. Now see you later. It's like, okay, let's start on this journey together and let's see where it goes.
And Kayla, to me, I think what I'd love to see more of, and is your act for someone like you to be preaching to the converted, right? Because I see some of the biggest challenges are chronic users of cannabis not fully understanding the power of its medicine. And so, like you mentioned, you know, somebody taking 40 milligrams when in fact they could get away with the trifecta, right? Or that they're using perhaps the wrong chemovar or cultivar, or they're dosing incorrectly. They're not taking their breaks. They're not. And also, I mean, I think it's amazing and so important what you talked about early on about that it is a holistic approach, and that eating properly and yoga, meditation, love are all things that build your endocannabinoid system as well. So do you just want to share a little bit more about chronic users and what they might be able to do to better understand what this medicine could be doing for them, or how they could change their habits to get better use out of it?
That's a great question, because I do work with some that they consider that they call themselves chronics. They like come there and they're like, I'm a chronic. I'm like, that's cool. Let's just sit down and let's break this down. And typically when they're in that category, it's like this high THC consumption. And so my encouraging message is that we need to keep adding in other cannabinoids. There's more to this plant than just THC. And if you haven't really experienced the other cannabinoids yet, you're missing out. And I'm like, well, it's going to mess with, you know, this, and this. And it's like, well, not necessarily. You know, you might not be feeling, say that, you know, especially somebody that smokes like throughout the day, like every 2 to 3 hours, because the duration is short. And I'll say, well, what do you think about if we take these cannabinoids, but we put it in an oral form, where you're on a more regular dosing schedule? We can take how you feel in that first hour after you inhale, or, you know, whatever it is, you smoke your joint, you do your dab, whatever. Let's take how that feels and let's extend it. And let's let you feel like this all the time, instead of like, oh, I feel good for a bit. Oh, no, now I don't feel good again. Now I feel good again. Now I don't feel good again. Like, that's up and down, up and down, up and down. That doesn't lead to a very good day. Can we give you this baseline? And then that's when we pull in those inhalation methods to be your as needed dose for when you need more. And so then it just, all of a sudden they're just like, that's how I wanted to feel. And now I get to feel like that, like from starting my day all the way through. And it's like a lot of mine, especially with like severe PTSD, they're like, I don't like being judged. I don't like pulling out that size of joint and smoking 3 of them in a 3-hour situation. I feel like I'm being judged. I don't necessarily love the smell on me. I'm like, that's okay. Well, we know you have a high tolerance for THC. Your endocannabinoid system might be quite deficient. Let's pull that all together. Let's get some CBD in your system, some CBG and your THC all at the same time. And they're just like, they just feel relief just to be introduced to some new way of consuming it. And they're like, oh, that's how I want it to feel. Like, you know, so it's really, it's really beautiful to be able to kind of pull it all together. And a lot of my clients are like, you know what, I don't want to smoke this, but this is the only option I've known so far. So then we start to kind of pull pieces together and introduce other routes of administration. And I always joke and I'm like, it'll only be a nurse that'll tell you this, but here's how to use a cannabis suppository and this is why you should. So they're like it'll only be a nurse to tell you to shove it there. But then sometimes for people, they're like, that's the only relief I had for my back pain or whatever it might be. Or that was my piece that like really helped with this like nerve pain elsewhere or something like that.
Now, you use the phrase endocannabinoid deficient.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good one.
What does that mean?
Oh, I love this. Ethan Rousseau again. I have so much research or like charting to like totally like they consider the theory, but so clinical endocannabinoid deficiency theory by Dr. Ethan Rousseau was that they looked at these group of conditions that they all are considered to be sort of garbage can diagnosis by Western medicine. So we've got PTSD, fibromyalgia, migraines, IBS, endometriosis. I feel like I'm missing one. Fibromygraines. Okay, anyways, that's what I got right now. I feel like I'm missing one. But all of these conditions are considered to be a garbage can diagnosis by Western medicine because they're diagnosed by exclusion. None of them have tissue pathologies where it's like, you know, you take some tissue and you're like, okay, you have endometriosis. It doesn't work that way. It's like, we test for everything else. You don't have anything. So now you have fibromyalgia because we can't find any other reason why you're experiencing this high sensitivity to pain. So you have fibro and we throw that diagnosis on them. And then unfortunately, they go through these Western medicine systems and they're stigmatized because of these diagnoses. Believe me, when I worked in Emerge and a fibro patient came in with a flare, you're just kind of like, there's some eye rolling happening. Oh, they're seeking drugs or whatever it might be, right? And so in this theory, so there's no diagnosable tissues. They're diagnosed by exclusion. They all have higher rates of anxiety and depression. And typically, if you have one of those disorders under this clinical endocannabinoid system deficiency theory, you're likely to have another. Like those with PTSD often have IBS as well. And so what Ethan Rousseau came out with this theory is what they noticed is that they all have remarkably lower levels of anandamide in certain areas of their brain. Or sorry, so PTSD would have less in the brain. Migraine sufferers would have less in the cerebral spinal fluid. They all have anandamide deficiency somewhere in the body. And they're all different depending on the diagnosis. And so the theory is that they have a deficient endocannabinoid system. So when we augment it with, say, somebody with PTSD takes in THC, and often what I've heard is they just felt right for the first time, even though they'd been on like 12 different pharmaceuticals and none of them worked. They all, yeah, sure, it might have, because if we look at PTSD, it's a complex diagnosis, right? There's mood dysregulation, there's higher sensitivity to pain, there's sleep issues, like there's all of these different things under that one diagnosis. So then they throw pills at each piece, at the pain, at the anxiety, at the depression, at the insomnia. And a lot of times they don't feel better. And then they start bringing in cannabis and all of a sudden they're sleeping better, their mood's better, their digestion's better. All of these things are better that fit under that deficiency. And so I've heard that over and over again, fibro patients. The first time I consumed cannabis, I just felt right. Like what a powerful thing. Or I've heard a PTSD sufferer. I said, okay, what made you decide to come to cannabis? And he said, I looked around at my friends and the ones that were on medications were either now on cannabis or they were dead. And so it's just showing that that wasn't working. And so when we start to augment this system with cannabis, then it starts to work and they start to find relief because they're bringing regulation to mood, appetite, pain, sleep, right? All these things that they're suffering with. And so it's a theory state. You can't go to your doctor and say like, test my anandamide. They'll be like, who the hell have you been talking to? What is that? We don't do that.
And
Unlikely.
Do you think it's a deficiency in anandamide or a deficiency in the receptors?
It can be either.
Either or. So it could be either or. Okay.
Yeah.
Would there ever be a case that you actually have too many receptors?
Yeah. So there can be other things where it's like your ECS tone. So we talk about tone. It's either like deficient or otherwise. So yeah, you can flip either way. You can either have like too much or you can have not enough and you still don't feel good on either place. Mm-hmm. There's certain conditions where we see more cannabinoid receptors in the bowel. So like CB2 receptors, they only increase in a place where we have injury or insult or disease, right? So it can be either way. It's like, and Dr. Ethan Rousseau, he said like, it'll probably be unlikely that we'll ever really test anandamide levels in people, because the range would be just so wide, what would be considered clinically normal, that it wouldn't really be definitive that somebody has a deficiency or not.
So I got another one. First of all, this is what they look like. They look like little grains of rice. So they're highly stable.
Yeah.
And they basically make that for something in sauce. What is that called out?
Terp sauce?
Terp sauce?
Yeah, so they mix those with the terp sauce, and they call it something, crystals and sauce or whatever.
Oh,
but,
diamonds?
Yeah, diamonds and sauce. That's right. These are the diamonds, and they mix it in with the sauce, and then you get back to where it really originally was, which I never understood why you would take it there. But, you know, as far as medically, though, that's a very easy way to produce that highly stable THCA that's, you know,
it's amazing.
Very easy to put into caplets or whatever. So Adam, hook her up with one of these LPs that are producing tons of shit, and they can crash it out for her, and now she's got access to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there are lots that are selling THCA crystals, diamonds, and it's a relatively simple process of just using low heat. So you're not getting to the point of decarboxylation, but you are removing some of the solvent and stuff. So yeah.
And then the question goes back to terpenoids or terpenes. What do you call them?
They're relatively the same thing. That's what I understand. I call them terpenes. I probably have the definition in this book. I remember reading it when I was writing the program, that there's like that small difference between terpenoid and terpene.
And I think that's an oxygenation thing, right? Once a terpene gets oxygenated, it becomes a terpenoid.
Well,
yeah, and it's like
I would think it'd be the opposite.
I'll find out.
It could be a deoxygenation.
Right. So as soon as it volatilizes, when you can smell it. So I would tend to think that the oxygen.
Kate, put your best guess in. I'm getting the answer.
Yeah.
I think it's terpenoid to terpene at oxidation. But again, I guess.
So a terpenoid is a highly diverse class of natural product or a modified class of terpenes having different functional groups with an oxidized methyl group removed in various positions. So as the plant dries and cures, terpenes turn into terpenoids. However, they are often used interchangeably.
So you were right, Av. They harden. They part of the cure.
And
part of the cure. Yeah.
And I think, and maybe some of our listeners also know how they go about making CBN as well, right?
Well, CBN is a breakdown of the process. So as it gets older and older, it converts to CBN.
Right, but you could probably fast forward that by just like leaving your bud out in the sun or something, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, heat, light, oxidation. That's why all your containers are not opaque, right? Did I get that word right?
Okay.
Yeah, that they like, or especially like when they talk about THCA, it's like make sure it's stored in like a cool, dark place in a not see-through container, because like a little bit of light and heat right away, that's into THC. And all of a sudden you're thinking you're taking a non-intoxicating dose, and you're like, well, no, that was very intoxicating, right?
So how do these terpenoids or terpenes affect the endocannabinoid system? Because anecdotally, as I've really learned, you know, again, I'm very blessed because I get to smoke some of the best weed on the planet. And it's always got, you know, generally speaking, it's lower THC. So I find the sweet spot is around 17, 18, high in the other cannabinoids. So you're getting those high terpenes, you know, CBC, CBD, CBGs, and stuff we probably even haven't figured out yet. But and to me, that's just way better of a high. I don't want to lay on the couch and go to sleep. I mean, I don't get it. But again, I think you answered one of the biggest other questions that has always been a mystery is, how can this person smoke all day and still function, and this guy not? And it's tones. We call them
absolutely
in the environment where you have a division, and it can be very wide or it can be very narrow. So thank you for sharing that.
And you know what? I've seen that in practice too, where I sort of come into a situation and I'm like, how in the world can this person consume that much THC? Like their tolerance is so high, like they need to take a break. But then I'm like, also it might not be like they might not be able to take a break because it is their medicine. That like tolerance break could really be detrimental to them. But then it got me thinking, it's like, well, if this is maybe a deficiency in their system, that say if they have like PTSD or something like that, maybe their system is literally that deficient that they're not getting that euphoric high from their THC consumption.
And you mentioned something about a tolerance break. I think, do you want to expand a little bit on that as well?
Yeah, so believe me, I never like to wish a tolerance break on anybody, especially if they're using it as medicine, because that just sounds awful. But it's like showing through, who did I think? It was through some clinical research that when we get up past like 20, 30 milligrams of THC consumption, that we begin to build tolerance over having medicinal value. So when those receptors, those CB1 receptors in the brain are sort of, that's where THC is binding, right? That's their lock. THC is the key. And after a while, those receptors, if they've seen the same thing over and over and over again, they're like, I'm bored. And they actually pop inside of the cell. Those receptors, those CB1 receptors actually start to downregulate. We start to have less receptors for CB1. And then it becomes this catch-up race, right? Like, I need to consume more to feel the way that I want it to feel. I need to consume more and more. But all you're doing is you're dropping the amount of receptors that are available to THC in the brain. And so it's said that a minimum of a 36-hour tolerance break can be time to allow those cannabinoid 1 receptors to reset themselves. And it's over time that the less THC that person's having influenced in their system, the more receptors will come back into balance. Their system will start to find balance again. So that's when we sort of like over nourish that system. It's like, yeah, it's just like kind of, it becomes deficient in its own sort of way. So then we need to take a break from the medicine. And you don't need to take a break from CBD, but you do need to take that break from THC. And in that break, allow the system reset, and then you come back to your medicine. Your lower doses are much more effective again.
And then what was I asked you about the terpenes and terpenoids. How do those affect the endocannabinoid system?
So they're the ones, like, I always sort of, with my clients, start with like the cannabinoid to like shape their experience, right? So allow them to shape their experience, and they work more on like the endocannabinoid biodome, so like the whole big system. But those like terpenes themselves is what shapes our experience. So we have like the unique the unique terpene beta caryophyllene. That's also a minor cannabinoid, so it can interact with our CB2 receptors, allowing for anti-inflammatory properties, mood boosting kind of potentials. And so I'll sit down with people and really help them shape their experience by understanding the terpenes, because it's not that sativa indica hybrid categorization that's really shaping how that flower consumption is going to be, or that oil consumption. It's those terpenes in there and really sort of identifying per person what terpenes work well for them, or if they have a strain and they're like, I hated that strain, I'm never consuming it. Okay, let's dive in deeper. It could be potentially that THC component, but it's like what terpenes are in there and why did they make you feel that way?
And there are so many terpenes. And I mean, that goes back to thousands of years of aromatherapy. Yeah. And so.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I just wonder, is that like helping us metabolize the THC and the CBD in any way? Or is it just providing another level of.
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I just really know like that we're sort of using terpenes to guide our experience with cannabis. And I'm like, I remember my husband like probably about a year ago, brought home this like strain that was like all full of pinene. And I'm like, have I taught you anything? I hate pinene. Like, what the hell? Like, take it home back. Or even how you mentioned like liking those lower THC strains, like those 17, 18% strains. My husband's a musician, and I was like, stop with the THC before your shows. Try like a 1-to-1, a CBD THC like smoke or edible or whatever. Completely converted him, and he's like a high THC consumer for the most part. And he's like, no, that's exactly how I want it to feel. And I'm like, I know I know my job. But again, it's coming from your wife, so don't listen. It's fine. Yeah. I don't listen to him either. So
perfect marriage.
We have
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Oh, okay. I thought it was me again.
Oh, you're back. Okay, you glitched out for a second there, but
oh shoot, yeah.
that's all right. It happens. So, Al, did you have another question, or?
Oh, I've got many, but I also know that our audience will have lots of questions too. So
Yeah,
I'm limited to a few. I wouldn't mind trying to slip us into getting a bit of a. I always want to tie this in back to it's all about the biology. That's what this channel sits on, and the soil matters, right? So, love for you to maybe talk a little bit about our gut microbiome, and then Leighton will definitely bring in our soil microbiome in that, and maybe talk about how that influences our endocannabinoid system or our just overall health. I mean, it's great absolutely. To have a nurse here who can speak about all these aspects.
Yeah, so we definitely know that like nourishing the endocannabinoid system outside of cannabis includes caring for that micro gut biome, right? They call it the second brain. And so by caring for that endocannabinoid system, we upregulate anandamide and cannabinoid receptors. And so with my clients, it's always sort of like helping them get that baseline with cannabis first. And then it's like, okay, in which direction are we working towards that we're going to nourish your system outside of cannabis? Because yeah, for sure, you can fill your system with as much cannabis as you want. But if you're doing all these behaviors that either dysregulate it or not doing many things that nourish it outside of cannabis, you're like pouring cannabis through a sieve. You're not actually really meeting your full potential of nourishing your endocannabinoid system. And so the more we can nourish our guts, the more we nourish our endocannabinoid system, the less actually cannabis we're likely going to need, right? Because it's all interconnected. And I know an example is my sister had started doing a lot of meditation and like all of these different sort of energy healing practices. And she goes, Kayla, like, this has been the first time in like 3 or 4 years I don't feel like consuming cannabis to help me sleep anymore. And I'm like, because you don't need to. You're boosting your bliss and your anandamide through your outside external practices. And that's beautiful. That's ultimately kind of what we want to be able to do, right? Is nourish the system. You know, cannabis is a tool in it, but there's so many other tools. And so if we give people some sleep, some mood regulation, and some pain control, then it's a lot easier to engage in like meditative practices, yoga, eating healthy foods, maybe preparing your own fermented foods or whatever it might be. Otherwise, we don't have the energy. It's not realistic to think like all of a sudden I'm going to be able to change how I eat, how I exercise, how I move my body. You know, all of these expectations we put on ourselves. I really find that this cannabis is such a beautiful way to actually make health promotion happen. And through my like nursing career, you know, we hear the word health promotion. I can't say I ever did it until I was actually working with cannabis. So that's kind of a roundabout thing about the microgut biome leading into other stuff. But
you know, that's so funny that you should say that and how important it is. And I think we're just starting to, well, I'd say the medical industry has just started to come around and say, hey, look, that's probably nutrition, like food might be actually medicine for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're definitely driving that horse in that direction, which is great. And I will definitely share story after story of how people can improve the balance of the cannabis plant and get what we call full genetic expression through using soil biology. So really healthy soil food web, KNF, natural farming, biodynamics. They're all going down that same direction of trying to hit that homeostasis with the plant and the soil connection. So, you know, this is something that I try, like, especially with like ABS groups, you know, who are using salts, to at least try to explore the, you know, mixing the two together so you can actually see what we're talking about, because you're never going to hit full potential when you're limiting the plant's abilities to express itself, just exactly like what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the human body, right? Like what we're putting into our bodies matters, you know, like how much water you're consuming, how much caffeine, how much alcohol, processed foods, all of that matters, because like our whole foods are full of terpenes. That's going to support our endocannabinoid system. it really matters. Back to the basics ultimately, right?
So you guys have at least what we hear down here is you have a pretty good medical system up there. Like, is that true? Or?
Which I think it's my naturopath referred to the Canadian healthcare system as a degenerative healthcare system. It is falling apart. I think Kayla described her colleagues, and they're all overworked.
I know, with the pandemic coming through and working in Emerge for the first parts of it, I always call my second son my pandemic saver, because they're like, "Oh, you're pregnant, get out." Okay. And then I built my business. But anyways, but our system was already broken before COVID. It just was like exacerbated and shown that it was broken through COVID. We see repeat people over and over again, right? So.
And the reason I asked that question is because a number of years back, when I first got into soil biology, my cousin married he was a medical chief of staff for an emergency room. So he had to know what every doctor does and make sure that he's calling every guys in at the right time to patch this guy or keep this person alive, whatever. And he said, "Hey, Leighton, Jen tells me that you're playing with microbiology or soil biology. What are you doing?" And so I told him, I said, "Well, years ago I started playing with fish manure and putting it on plants and just seeing these plants explode. And so I went down to this person named Dr. Elaine Ingham, and I studied on her for a period of time to get an understanding of why that was happening." And he goes, "By any chance, do you have protozoa in it?" I go, "Dude, I got millions of protozoa. And I got all kinds of different solubilizing bacteria, and we call them degraders. We have solubilizing, and we have decomposers, and bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, everything." And he goes, "You ever heard of a fecal transplant?" And I was like, "No, what the heck is that?" And I'm sure you well know what it is. So I said, "Hey, if you have to do that to people, why wouldn't you just have them eat compost that was super healthy?" And he goes, "Wait, what?" I said, "Yeah, just mix up the tea, drink the tea, suppository, and eat a pill. So that way you're hitting the stomach, you're hitting the upper intestine, you're hitting the lower intestine." And he was like, "Oh my God." And I'm like, yeah, I can build you a clean room and compost specific plants that you want for the system that will provide this biology. And now the patient, it's an outpatient. It's like, here, drink this tea, eat this pill, stick this one up your butt. You're done. Maybe 3-4 times, whatever it would take.
Yeah.
But talk about cost savings. So he goes, "I'm going to bring this to the board."
Yeah.
And so I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks. And finally I called him. I said, what's up? You left so excited about this. The hospital couldn't find out a way to monetize it. So they don't want anything to do with it. Like, that's ridiculous. That's just insanity. So there's a little trick for you. If you know somebody that can make biocomplete compost, and that's really important. They need to know how to use a microscope. They need to know how to use different plants and herbs, because when I make compost, it's not just a few plants. I'm taking plants from all over the place, because that's the key to getting that diversity that you're looking for. But there's a great way to put your gut health back in place, even if you are eating shitty food.
That's the thing. There's some of these solutions are in our eyes, so simple, right? Like, how many clients did I see in Emerge with repeat migraines and fibro flares and all of these things? And here now, I just, they nourish their endocannabinoid systems, initially starting with cannabis and other healthy behaviors. And this last month, I've had somebody report to me that they went from about 18 migraines a month, down to 1 in a month, literally just by supplementing with CBD in their system. And then it was helping with a whole bunch of other things too, like anger and aggression and mood and pain and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, "How didn't I know about this sooner?" And it, it's just our perceptions, right? That, prohibition caused it, this inability to monetize it, or even have a DIN number, a pharmacy number. It's really, really troublesome for healthcare facilities to think how do I administer a medication that doesn't have a specific dose? That in somebody's Western medicine mentality is something very, very hard to wrap their head around, that a patient could be responsible for finding their own dose with the right education. It's a very, very odd way of looking at medicine. And yes, in Canada, we do have access to good health care. And, you know, if you know how to navigate the system, if you know how to advocate for yourself. And as a nurse with a kid that, like, my first son was born unable to poop, like, the amount of advocacy work that I had to do for him was unreal. And yes, I'm grateful that I never had to pay for his surgeries that he needed and the hospital care that he needed. But you really need to know how to navigate the system and how to advocate in the system. And most people don't. And I think that's why so many fall kind of to the wayside within the system. And then I think Canada is doing a big disservice within our medical cannabis system as well, putting a holistic medicine through a Western allopathic model. You know, you don't just sit down with a cannabis prescribing physician or NP for 10 minutes and like, yep, got it, on my way. I work with my clients for 3 months. My initial education session is 3 hours. You know, like, it's not a medicine that's just like this, right? Go here, take this pill, you're good, you're done, you know? And that's what we're sort of doing with this Western, or like within Canada here in our medical cannabis model, is like 10, 15 minutes on the phone. Great, you got your script now go shopping. And they're like, I've had a lot of people go like, what do I start with? And it's like, no, you don't get a new blood pressure medication and then just start scrolling and decide, well, that one looks pink, I think I'll try that one, or this one, that's a nice shape, I'll try this one, right? You know, like, there's a lot more to it, and we've just like really kind of missed the mark. And I think that's where we see like a lack of maybe respect for the medicine, is that we're just not providing patients and clients with the education. And you have to take a step back for a minute and realize that the individuals coming to cannabis, like myself, were at their wits' end. They were at their most vulnerable, broken. And we've seen that in our Cannabis Act reviews and looking at the medical cannabis program, that the main reason people were coming to cannabis or medical cannabis is because all of their other treatments weren't working. And I think about over 60% of medical cannabis users in Canada also use other multiple pharmaceuticals and are typically over the age of 55. And so when we look at those kind of three statistics together, it speaks loudly to the point that these are actually really vulnerable patients. Nothing's worked. They've tried everything. Their quality of life is majorly impacted. And now you're saying, here's a 10-minute appointment. Here's a brand new product that you likely thought was evil. Now go on your way and we'll follow up with you in maybe 6 months and see how you're doing. It's not enough. It's not enough.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many horror stories Paula would tell me, because exactly that. You know, they would go to the cannabis shop, the dispensary. Some kid would say, "Oh, use this," right? Because that's the one that's selling the most, because the other people that are going there want to get high, not fucking heal. Yeah. And so these people would end up on the floor having a panic attack because
they never touch the medicine again.
Yeah, exactly right. She'd have to talk them off the friggin' ledge and like, no, we're going to titrate you up. We're going to find that microdose where you just start to feel a little something. Then we know where your threshold is and we'll stay below that. So you know, that is like, I don't know how the system is going to fix that, because it's going to take people like you doing this work to openize the people that don't just go out and do this, because you're gonna ruin it for yourself.
No, absolutely. And I think like that, I sat at the Health Canada Roundtable reviewing the medical program in the spring here. And I was sharing that my perspective about these being vulnerable people, and that we don't have educators in the system that are qualified. Like nurses. Nurses are typically, they are your educator. Doctor comes in, blah, 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 you know, says all the big things. Then the nurse comes in with their calming energy and is like, okay, let's break this down. Let's help. Let me help you understand at the way that you understand. That's our role. That's our magic as nurses. And how do we not have any nurses in this medical cannabis program? There's a couple clinics that have a few of them, but like, how are we not providing education and follow-up, especially for considering this a medicine? And now that we have dispensaries, we like see, and we've seen from these survey results that physicians are absolutely being asked more about medical cannabis now that we have like federal legalization or rec legalization since 2018. They're getting way more questions. And their response is, I don't know. And 70% of them send them into the rec world. And they say, well, just go to a dispensary, just try it. Why not? And I'm like, you got granny going in there on blood thinners. And like literally her grandkids told her, oh, you just got to use CBD. It's going to help. You're not going to get high. It's perfect. Where little does this little granny know that CBD is at a higher risk for her than THC because it interacts with her blood thinner, you know? And it's like, we're missing this mark because there's just not enough awareness, education. I don't know. You know, it's like we got a long ways to go.
Yeah,
But,
that's for sure.
you know,
And then,
grassroots efforts, right? You know, some of the clinics, like physician or chief medical officers were like, well, that's great, Kayla, but it needs to be in universities. The thing is universities don't even want to touch it. So we got to start somewhere. And if I start bringing nurses that are trained and start journeying alongside patients, and we're seeing these beautiful changes and we're seeing them become less dependent on systems, we will change perspective over time. But it is grassroots, and it's going to, you know, it's one person at a time right now.
so there's this cat, Kevin Jodry, down here in California. He's like he's an OG, like goes way back. And he's now teaching in, I think he said something like 27 colleges.
Amazing.
If you sign up for a cannabis class, how to grow cannabis in one of these colleges, he does it all virtually. But that's, can you introduce that into your system where you do have some place you can send people to you on a virtual platform where you can start to open these doctors' minds, like, no, don't send them to the dispensary because they're going to have a bad trip and then they're never going to go back to it. I mean,
and it's I think like I've been invited to speak at some symposiums and stuff at our local hospitals, which I think is like a great place to start educating and just providing and even if when I start with like people in the Western medicine field to provide education, I start with education about the endocannabinoid system. I'm not just going to come right out of the gates talking about cannabis necessarily. Let's talk about this endocannabinoid system. And let's talk about why you might be so frustrated trying to manage somebody's chronic pain that has fibromyalgia or migraines. And like, you can't feel good as a prescribing physician when you can't meet your client's needs, right? When your PTSD sufferer is still suffering, when your migraine sufferer is still suffering, right? And so here is another thing that could help your clients if it aligns with them, right? Like that should be a welcome thing, right? But then we also meet these huge barriers of the cost of cannabis to have effective medicine. The cost of it to people is often not affordable to the general person that doesn't have benefit coverage for cannabis, right? Like there is still these sort of roadblocks in place. It's the only medicine that's taxed, there is still like a lot of system things that we need to see change.
Well, it sounds like you're definitely hitting on all cylinders and getting in the right direction. So big kudos to you for this.
Yeah.
Hey, Al, what do you think? Should we try to take some of the questions now because they may lead into questions?
Perfect. I think it'd be great. And as a host, I'll start with one. As Ken is ready to go, but I do have a question, and it ties into a little bit to what Leighton had talked about before around terpenes, and many terpenes are antifungal, they antibacterial, and we talked about using suppositories. To me, using cannabis as an anal suppository, you're not as worried about the biome at the anus. But for those who have a vagina, you do have to kind of worry about that. There's a healthy flora, fauna in that area. What is any concern with using cannabis? With cannabis, I mean, in itself is antifungal, antibacterial. Any worries there?
I think what I've seen from the suppositories is those companies that are really making their products intentionally really actually speak to that when you look up about their product, that it's made at it because you have to be careful about the vaginal pH, right? So if we're adding something to that environment, it needs to be within that pH range, as well as respecting that, like you said, that we do have a biome in that area. So then these producers that are really trying to make medicine, if you look up and you do your research, they'll speak to all of these things, that it's the right pH, that it's respectful of the biome, all of these different things, that it's made properly for absorption. That's a huge one with suppositories. Because if you just have a fat carrier, that's helpful for the cannabinoids, but we need some kind of water-based or hydrophilic something to help to get absorption into the human body. And so I know the team of the nurse and the pharmacist that brought the first cannabis suppositories to the Canadian market here, they did that. They knew that their product was amphiphilic, so that it was fat and water soluble. So then you're actually getting cannabinoid absorption, that it had the proper pH, that it protected the biome. So I think a huge piece is being an educated consumer in this market. And that goes with any product, right? Like there's all these special little niches and words. And that's what I often help people do, is like start to recognize, like, what does live resin mean? What does full spectrum mean? How do you know when you look at a product, is it a quality product? Because this market there's so many.
But what's your thought? I mean, to me, the beauty in most of the Canadian provinces is that you can grow your own cannabis, and I like the idea of growing your own medicine and then being able to use it. What are your thoughts about creating your own suppositories? Is that do you draw a line there and you feel like maybe this is something that I should, look for the regulated market to buy a product?
Well, ideally, yes, to be able to get that like amphiphilic thing, but then we can't forget that there's a cost factor in that. If somebody's like, say, has a cervical cancer or maybe hemorrhoids or endometriosis, and they want to use a suppository every day or twice a day, it's not affordable to the general person, right? Like when you've got 4 suppositories or 5 suppositories for $40, like it's not realistic. So of course, if you can start to formulate your own and it's like providing you with relief, then why not, right? Because it's, you've got to make it accessible. And unfortunately, a lot of our medicine isn't accessible at this point.
And I just wanted to add something to Av's. Pauline used suppositories a lot because they don't break the blood-brain barrier. So she didn't get whacked on them. And she made her own. So it's the same thing you're talking about, affordable. Yeah, it's super expensive, but you're not talking about using them vaginally, are you? You're just talking about suppository, correct?
I was talking about using them vaginally.
Okay. Would you ever recommend that, Kayla?
To use them vaginally?
Yeah. Versus.
Oh, for sure.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so it's more like anecdotal over time. Like I was like, which hole do I put it in? I'm like, well, try both. Let's see which one works better. But ultimately, like if a woman's like dealing with like dyspareunia, so painful intercourse, then I would encourage them to use it vaginally, because then, and if you think about like dry eyes, dry mouth with THC, what's happening is vasodilation. THC is causing the vessels to get larger. So if we like move it to the reproductive organs and we're increasing blood flow through that vasodilation, that can mean like more nutrients to the pelvis, that can mean more lubrication. And I've seen it be really effective for women that are struggling, say, postmenopausal, or for other pelvic conditions, say like endometriosis and stuff like that, that using a suppository close to that source can be really, really helpful. One thing with the rectal use of suppositories is that you can't insert it too high. Just get it in there. Just let it get sucked up, but leave it there, because if the higher it gets inserted, then we have a portal vein. So that vein there can pick up those cannabinoids, and somebody can get high off of a rectal administration of cannabinoids. Like it's got to go a long ways to get up there, but to the brain to cause intoxication. But insertion and the depth of insertion is really important in preventing that euphoric high that we're sort of looking for when using suppositories.
Thank you for that. That's a wealth of knowledge.
And it's just such a powerful way to use medicine. When we swallow cannabinoids, like in oils or whatever it might be, edibles, we only absorb 20 to 30% of those cannabinoids. So when you take a 10 milligram dose, you're really only absorbing 2 to 3 milligrams. Like that's not very much, right? With a proper suppository with the right formulation and the right insertion, you can absorb up to 80% of a cannabinoid. So I have a client that's got really severe ulcerative colitis and PTSD. He can't take the amount of oils he needs to help treat his symptoms, because it like causes a huge flare in his ulcerative colitis. So then it's like, okay, what about suppositories? What if you take in 100 milligrams of CBD in a suppository form every day? How would that help augment your system? Because it's a different way of absorbing without going through the gut and all that kind of stuff, causing issues on the other side of things. So,
and would that be 100 milligrams of a full spectrum, or would that have been 100 milligrams of isolate?
I'd have to look back at the product. I'm not sure. I always love to see full spectrum in anything from like a topical to a suppository to a tincture to an oil, any of that. It's always first line defense is full spectrum for sure. But then I have actually like sort of opened my eyes and like ideas about the use of like an isolate, like when you can dissolve it into water when somebody can't orally take in all the oil carriers from CBD or THCs or whatever it might be. Okay, then maybe this is where our isolate form does come into play, but I'll always like default first and foremost to full spectrum if people can tolerate it. And then next to be like broad spectrum if somebody needs to have THC removed because they're drug tested or whatever it might be, well then let's just have a product that just has the THC removed.
Okay, Ken, I'll shut up.
Oh, hey, you guys asked such brilliant questions, you know, that I'm gaining so much information, and I want to thank you guys for the questions that you're asking. But we'll start with Hillbilly Herb. My mother-in-law really wants to try CBD for sleeping and arthritic pain, but she's on blood pressure pills, still trying to figure out how the impact of CBD with heart rate.
Okay, so I'm assuming it maybe means like CBD and potentially like the heart or blood pressure. So cannabinoids can increase heart rate, like THC can, so can CBD at certain doses. So most of the doses that we would take in the general public, so when we're not like doing research studies, our doses of CBD are very unlikely to interact with our medications. Not impossible, but relatively unlikely. So when it comes to that blood pressure piece, CBD, again, vasodilation, it can affect your blood pressure, potentially lowering your blood pressure. So it would just be sort of a mindful thing of like, if she's standing up, is she noticing that she feels wobbly or dizzy, like her blood pressure's dropped? Or is she starting to feel kind of woozy and weak? Like that's when you're going to want to, if you're introducing CBD in and you have blood pressure issues and you're using blood pressure medication, you're going to want to keep an eye on your blood pressure, take it morning and night, keep a record of it. And if that blood pressure changes over time as you introduce CBD in, that can mean that you're actually going to end up dropping your antihypertensive medication. And I've seen that a lot. I've seen lots of people wean off narcotics, blood pressure medications, and even some diabetic medications using different cannabinoids. So there's just like it's just a caution, right? Just be aware. Like if you use it for the first time and you're going to get up to go to the bathroom in the night, I don't know how elderly she is. Maybe she uses a walker. Make sure the walker is by the bed. Have those safety pieces there. What was interesting though, I was in a dementia symposium about cannabinoids, and there's been research done where yes, THC, and this is THC specific, can kind of change the length of the gait, but they actually didn't see any increase in falls with elderly consuming THC. So really interesting, really important to be cautious, but it was really like, and I've actually rarely seen that in my practice too. So, but it's good to be mindful of it. But for sure, and if they want to use it for sleep and arthritic pain, it's just to keep in mind that your dosing is biphasic. So low doses of CBD might be really great during the day for arthritic pain and sort of bringing like, some energy into people's lives. But if you want to use CBD for sleep, you're going to need to use much higher doses. So as your dose of CBD increases, then you might start to get some fatigue. And I always really try to provide as much education as possible where we're using, like I said, maybe that trifecta where when we use these big doses of CBD, we're sort of protecting ourselves from those potential side effects of THC, but we don't need to just be like, no THC ever, because that's what's really going to help with that sleep component. But a great place to start first as the body gets used to cannabinoids is a larger dose of CBD at night to help with sleep.
And he says, great tips, Kayla. Much thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, and the hope is to get off pills eventually. And that's I come to that so many times. Like, I've been on this morphine forever and it's not working. My pain is excruciating. I want to get off of it. And so it's this idea first, let's acknowledge your endocannabinoid system. Let's nourish your endocannabinoid system, get things to a better place. And then that's when we start to consider dropping the pharmaceuticals. It's not the first step to drop them. It's sort of as time goes on. One of my chronic pain sufferers, I think he hit about the 5-week mark of dosing and he's on morphine still. And he's like, Kayla, my pain is better. I mowed the lawn. Didn't even need help to get on the lawn tractor. This is a big moment. So we're celebrating okay, are you sleeping? Awesome. actually he had a neurogenic bladder too, so he was up like 6+ times a night to go to the bathroom. Introduced CBD, CBN, THCs down to 1 time, and his wife's like, I need to get him out of bed after 12 hours now. What's going on? We're like, his cannabis is working. But then it's now that he's at that point where things are feeling better, that in conversation with the doctor, where we'll start to, you know, under their guidance, start to drop the narcotic and then work towards potentially changing our cannabinoid dosing if needed.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the end goal, is to be off the pharmaceuticals and to find that homeostasis.
Or even just reduce pharmaceutical intake so that people don't have side effects, or use them together too, right? Is this like where they can really work together synergistically, right? Because sometimes we do need some pharmaceuticals, and we're lucky we have science and we have them available to us. And some people's really great spot is a little bit of both. And I think that's where this role of the nurse really comes in, is to like be able to bring in kind of both worlds together.
And in a lot of ways that segues into Silly Lily's question. So is the endocannabinoid system a healing system or balancing system?
The endocannabinoid system is everything system.
It is the system.
Yeah, Lily, I would say it's both. It's a beautiful thing that's like really presented throughout like the cannabis nursing program and the cannabis nursing textbook that I have, is that cannabis is supplementing our bodies to self-heal. We're nourishing this master regulator of the human body, allowing our bodies to function the way that they're capable of functioning. And I think that's like such a beautiful way to put it. It's like, because a lot of my clients don't even want to take like capsule forms of cannabis because it feels too much like the other pharmaceuticals they're taking. They want to take the oil form because it's different. And so all we're doing is we're just trying to find the ability to self-heal. And it's often when I say to my clients is like, they're like, okay, I want less pain. I want to sleep better. I want this, I want this, I want this, right? And it's like, okay, that's awesome. Let's see if we can work towards these goals. But ultimately, because we don't have that research to say, here's this condition, this is exactly what you're going to do. It's okay. Let's be mindful about how we nourish this endocannabinoid system. Let's introduce it to a bunch of different routes of administration, cannabinoids, whatever suits your needs. And then let's see how your endocannabinoid system shows up for you. When I do my follow-up at 2 weeks, it's not uncommon to be like, oh, I have something weird to tell you. And I'm like, you're shitting lots, aren't you? They're like, yes, I've never pooped this much in my life. And I'm like, I know we were talking about pain, but now we're talking about poop. But it's like, well, that's where your endocannabinoid system is showing up for you first, is trying to bring balance into these bowels. And this is what your body needed. And they're just like, yeah, my pants fit better. And I'm like, well, that's great. But like, it's just surprising what for some people might show up. Sometimes in the first little bit, that's kind of when you see the odd things. Like somebody asked me the other day, they're like, why am I eating salad and liking it? Like, I want to eat salad. And like, I always used to eat salad because I knew it was good for you, but I never liked it. But now I want it. And so then that's that conversation about likely that your system is switching from this fight and flight response into this rest and digest. And so instead of wanting these fast salts, carbs, sugars for energy, your body's flipping over and it's like, well, I have this baseline of regulation. Now I'm going to tell you what I need. And so it's so beautiful to just watch these people, because they might say, well, I tried to do this, eat healthier, exercise better, all of these things. I've tried it and it's never worked. And then all of a sudden what we do is I say we set an intention to nourish our endocannabinoid system outside of cannabis. It's not a goal, it's an intention. Put it on the shelf, forget about it, and let's focus on the main things first: sleep, pain, mood. Okay. And then they're like, you know what, Kayla? I got back on my exercise bike. I'm exercising. And I'm like, yeah, because you're sleeping at night and you're in less pain. Big surprise. You have energy to exercise. Like, it's just so basic in the end that we need to, and like, there's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a theory that we learn in nursing school, that you don't get to your self-actualization or your optimal health and wellness until you have your baseline. You need food, you need safety. And then from there, then you can nourish your body with like relationships and, those sort of different things. But it's a hierarchy and you can't get to the top until you have each one of the levels. And cannabis can help us with that baseline level.
Exactly. So we'll rush to the next one here. How can we get the endocannabinoid system and how it works to be studied and taught by medical universities?
So I think we're starting to see it in some places, and I think it's going to be these like agents of change that are sort of popping up everywhere that are advocating for understanding of the endocannabinoid system. We need to see advances in our research about it, which means we actually need to be able to approve clinical studies when we're studying cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. So I think we just have to keep talking about it. We just have to keep being those advocates, and that eventually there's not going to be a way to ignore it.
Education, education, education.
And it's one person at a time. It's not, you know, if you have a conversation about the endocannabinoid system, or I have a client who's able to sit down with a rheumatologist and talk about the endocannabinoid system, that's a very different conversation than sitting down and saying, I'm smoking dope and I'm feeling better. You know, it's like this patient is sitting down there and saying, I'm nourishing my endocannabinoid system using this, and this, and I feel better. That's a totally different conversation, but that's one seed planted. And then another client's planting a seed here. And I think if we just continue to plant these seeds, that we will see a lot of change and growth.
I think the more people that, like us, when we go and talk to our doctor and talk to them and actually understand the language, then the doctor is going to get more curious and more curious the more that they hear about it. And then all of a sudden they might start using it and going, oh, geez, maybe this stuff does work.
Totally. And we have education and programs available for like physician level. Now we have nursing, like it's out there. It's just we need to like sort of call on our practitioners to acknowledge it and pay attention. Because every practitioner out there has clients that are using cannabis recreationally, medicinally, and ultimately in the end, anybody consuming cannabis is consuming some type of medicine, even if they know it or not, right? That we're likely treating something, they just don't know maybe what it is, right? So
I know I always tell people that it doesn't matter if you think you're just doing it recreationally, you're doing it medically, you just don't realize it. So we'll jump into the next one. Rusty Nails wants to know, is there a medical reason for limiting THC intake in these full spectrum meds, or is that more like a prohibition talking?
To limit THC intake. So I guess when it comes to that like THC component, it's a personal response, right? If somebody's experiencing a lot of side effects from a high THC dose, well, there's a sign that you need to lessen your THC dose. Or if you're continuing to consume more and more and not getting your results that you want, then there's kind of like there's little clues that maybe it's like there's a need to look at this differently, consume different cannabinoids, take a tolerance break, what that might be. Everybody's THC that they can consume is super unique. And to be honest, as I move through my practice, it's like been a realization of mine over actually the last month from a couple of clients that some people do really need these high doses of THC. So how do we get it into them? Maybe using RSO, or that's where we see like the use of live rosins and, you know, more in that sense. And so that sort of like really kind of shifted my perspective. But everybody's so uniquely different. There isn't a right amount for anybody, you know? So.
And I want to bring up Irene Donahue's statement here.
Irene, thank you for that. I mean, you're so spot on. When Pauline came down with it and she started talking to her doctor about naturopath and cannabis, he almost threw her out of the hospital. And she had to go toe to toe with him and say, no, I don't want chemo, I don't want radiation, and if you do that to me, I'm going to sue you. And
totally, it's shifting.
At the end of that relationship, he actually hugged her and asked her for a pendant to protect him so he didn't get cancer by default, because that's all he did. So she turned him around, but it took 6 months of working together. That's great.
Irene, totally right that we are seeing this perspective shift, and I'm starting to see referrals come in from like psychologists, medical case managers, like that kind of stuff, or like, no, this could potentially be an option. I helped an individual that his next option for his aggression and anger was inpatient treatment, like away from his home. And instead they referred me, and I came in and I helped him in his home for 3 months. And then that was effective, right? And it didn't remove him from his family situation. It didn't put him into this different environment. He like kept in his same environment and was able to address those things using cannabis, as well as other things like psychologists and different stuff like that. But yeah, I think that we are seeing a shift, and the Cannabis Act shows when we've been in review that with legalization, a lot more perspectives are changing on cannabis consumption and the use of cannabis as medicine too here in Canada.
Well, Irene's in top chat and she's also on LinkedIn, so she's not going to be seeing most of the chat, guys. So anyway, we're going to go on to the last question that I have in the back here. Boulder wants to know, why would it take me like 3 hours or more on average to feel the effects of the edibles?
Oh, I love this question. Do you eat when you take your edibles? So when we consume oral forms of cannabis on an empty stomach, our absorption is so incredibly low, and it takes in a more extended period of time to digest and like start to feel the effects from cannabis, to potentially increase the or to shorten the duration before you feel the effects. Get something fatty in your stomach. It makes the world of a difference. Cannabis is a fat-loving molecule. Our bodies are made out of water. We need to give it a chance to absorb. And a colleague that works with me, she gave me the perfect example of this. And usually in the evening, like her and her husband have young kids like us, and so I taught them how to use like a balanced edible in the evening, like, have some laughs, have a good time, go to bed, wake up at 5 a.m. with the built-in alarm clocks and start on your day. And so they thought, okay, this is perfect. It was Valentine's Day. We're just going to order food in, have supper with the kids, throw the kids to bed, and we'll have our edible dose. Well, for that supper, they ordered in from Red Lobster. So it was like super decadent, lots of fat in the meal, dessert, all of it. Took their edible and greened out because the absorption rate was so much higher. She's like, it wasn't fun. I crawled to bed. And I was like, that sucks. But now I'm going to use that teaching example for the rest of my career. Thank you. But it really does matter, that fat consumption and the food that you have in your stomach. When you're taking in oral cannabinoids, you got to have food, extra points for something fatty. And I think a study that I looked at, literally the difference was like a fasted stomach after 8 hours had almost no absorption of cannabinoids. And then they literally, I think, had butter on toast, and the absorption like massively increased.
Yeah. Well, I know I talked to a lot of people about, because I make a powder, about sprinkling it on yogurt because there's your fat to take it in. And it's going to absorb into your body that much faster. But that's it for the back end question, guys.
So that's why they made brownies originally. That's the edible.
Yeah, I bet. Hey,
a long chain fatty acid to deliver to the body. So get back to the basics, people. We had to figure it out.
I know, that's the thing. Yeah, especially when we look back in ancient history, we're still using cannabis for the same things we used it for 6,000 years ago. Like, right? It's an ancient medicine. We just need to sort of revolutionize our perspective on it, and we need education. People can't be independent, empowered, educated users unless they're provided with the education. And many of my clients have been in the medical cannabis program for a really long time, and they're like, "Why didn't I get this from the beginning?" And I'm like, wasn't around yet. So maybe we'll change that. I'm not sure. We're working on it.
Well, I got one that's a little outside the box to wrap it up.
Okay, let's bring it.
Have you, or can you, or is Canada even allow it to start microdosing psychological clients with mushrooms instead of cannabis? Like, one of the first things I did when I met Pauline is we got together. I saw how many antidepressants and anti-anxiety she was taking. And I was able to get her off those within 3 months of microdosing mushrooms. And that was amazing. That was like a gateway to starting to get rid of all of these other pills that she had to take on a daily basis. So have you thought about any of that?
I haven't dove in deep into like psilocybin and psychedelics. I absolutely believe that they have a place. Like, we know ayahuasca works on the endocannabinoid dome. Like, there's all of these plant medicines that I really, that have been prohibited for so long that have so much potential. I don't have like a lot of I haven't done a lot of studying on it. Just like, I've watched my husband microdose, and like, just night and day difference. You're cranky. Can you microdose, please? Or
please.
Yeah, or singing. He's a musician that nourishes the endocannabinoid system. Like, go play your guitar. Your endocannabinoid system needs some support, right? So, and I think it's just like, we're at this sort of place, and I think the pandemic brought us closer to that brink of just being really frustrated that we don't have the answers that we want or need. And so then people are moving outside of that and like introducing those different sort of plant medicines. So yeah, I hope to see more, but I don't know a ton about mushrooms. So far, my world's been filled with cannabis. So
there you go. I just had to ask because usually, like, when you're hanging with the cannabis community, they kind of go hand in hand.
Totally. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, I do actually want to bring something else up, and Hillbilly Herb has kind of mentioned it here. The use of sunflower lecithin. Now, I've heard that lecithin actually increases the effectiveness of any of the oils that you use it in. Is that something you've heard?
I haven't heard that specifically. It like vaguely rings a bell, so I couldn't speak to that. With the edible piece, that comment there, it could also, it depends on how that, what's, what the extract is. Has it been nano emulsified? Have the cannabis molecules been shrunken down in size so that they become water soluble? Then those gummies are going to kick in fast compared to, just your regular concentrate. So there's all these different sort of formulations, but yeah, I'm not sure. Have you guys heard more about the sunflower stuff or?
Guys, the only thing I've heard about is the oils. Like, what oils to use to
like
help
the carriers?
Yeah, to pull it out and store it so that it can be absorbed quicker. And yeah, I've heard about the nanoparticles, but they're like not mainstream yet. So I don't even know like if people are labeling them as this is fast release or slow
We
release.
do see that in Canada here in the edible packaging will be like fast acting edible. Like they'll have a couple different versions. So I'll teach my clients to sort of look like for nano emulsification, because there's also things here like oral cannabis sprays. And I'm like, you're literally spraying oil under your tongue and just holding it there. It's pointless. It just tastes bad. Right. So then we're like, when we're looking at those sublingual products to go under the tongue, have they been nano emulsified? Is any sort of languaging like that in the description? Then we know it's been made to actually work properly. You're not just holding something that tastes awful under your tongue.
Now, Irene says she's seen some studies showing the binders of it. Oh my God. I'm not even going to try.
Infinity?
Yeah. Binding affinity, and also that it is not good for those with breast cancer because of the omega ratios. Okay, that must be the sunflower.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for that, Irene.
All right. Well, listen, Kayla, I really appreciate all the work you're doing. Thank you so much for coming on to the show and spending 2 hours. Yeah, sharing all this amazing insight.
I think you won out. I think you've had the most gold bars of any presenter.
What does the gold bar mean? I don't know what that means.
It's just when Ken hears something amazing, he just go.
Gold bar. I'll take it.
And then he has them raining in the background too.
Oh and yes, I did enjoy that.
Yeah, see?
I feel like a celebrity.
You should be.
You are.
Oh man. No, it was great. Thank you so much for having me, and yeah, just being able to share my passion. So
was there another question you were trying to ask?
No, I was just the question was if you had any big wow moments going to Denver and meeting other cannabis nurses, anything new that kind of sparked?
Oh, absolutely. I got to meet Wanda James and have breakfast with her.
She's
so
great.
that was like a big thing. So you're welcome, Will. Yeah, so and just to be like surrounded by that many like-minded professionals, like I often feel like I'm kind of existing, like trying to make my like own little, community of nurses that sort of align with that. But just to be within that energy of like that many nurses that are like-minded, and just really also being able to share sort of the impact of federal legalization. Because when you're a Canadian there was 4 of us there out of 200. They're just like, well, you have federal legalization, but really being able to share with them like some of our pain points about bringing in this federal legalization in this recreational world. That just sort of empowering these nurses that they do still have the ability to push forward federal legalization, but ensuring that this nursing education goes with it. Whereas now we're just like trying to catch up and like be like, hey, you forgot about us. Like, look at how much better patient outcomes are with us. Like that kind of a thing. So it was really cool to kind of just, share that perspective. And it was great. It was a great time. I really enjoyed being there.
And
Do you
200
have
people.
any events coming up, Kayla, that people can reach out? And other than your YouTube or your .com address, how else can people reach out to you for more of the Cannabis Nursing Chorus?
So that it's all on my website, the Cannabis Nurses, like it's right there in my offerings is the cannabis program, and it'll link you over to the CIINDE. So it's CIINDE.com is the CIINDE. So where the program is put out through. So yeah, they can check it out there. And then, yeah, just stay tuned as we work on sort of a program for people that aren't nurses that are really interested in having a deep understanding of the endocannabinoid system, cannabinoids, and what they can do for us as well as routes of administration. So,
So any guys, you guys have anything coming up where people can reach out to you guys?
No, just work, eat, and sleep right now. I think we're doing a compost cup. We're trying to get it together out here for this fall. But other than that, no, just busy working.
Right. I'll be starting up, working for the Grow Up Conference in October, October 1st to the 3rd, and MJ Biz in Las Vegas, November 30th to December. So
fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, so
and
to come out to Victoria. We'll see.
Yeah, let me know. I'd love to.
Thank you.
Well, hopefully I can make that one too. But for us on the channel, guys, we've got Andy Lopez again on Wednesday, the Invisible Gardener. We've got Mr. Toad and Luna Whitcomb coming on for her new show on Thursday. So you guys are going to want to check that out. And other than that, it's back to next Monday. And we have Dr. Elaine Ingham coming on next Monday. She has confirmed that she's going to be here to talk with Av and Leighton next Monday.
Sweet.
Super. Great.
Well,
and with that, I'm going to
thank you, Kayla. And as always, Ken, thanks for hosting it. And Av, pleasure as always.
No, thank you guys all. It was great.